Outstanding. Thank you very much. And thank you all for joining today. This is the very first webinar for the MASPA Financial Wellness Education Committee for the 24-25 academic year. Truth be told, we were hoping to get this webinar set up a little bit earlier so we didn't have to run into November, and certainly not on election day, and certainly not at lunch when some people may be looking to get out to vote. So we all certainly all appreciate you joining us, but maybe with the way this election cycle has gone, and it seems that the past 2 or 3 presidential cycles as well, it might be good for us to get together on election day and put all that aside for at least an hour and talk about a very relevant topic. So my name is Patrick Ziegler, along with Kate Ravandari from Mount Holyoke and Tisha Wilson from Bunker Hill Community College. We're this year's tri-chairs for the Financial Wellness Education Committee, and we appreciate all of you joining. And on behalf of the entire Financial Wellness Education Committee, I thank them for all the work that they do. This has been one of the most active committees, I understand, in MASPA over the past few years, so it's a privilege to play some small role in keeping this going and to bring this topic to all of you. The attendance, or at least the registration list, we'll see if everyone manages to show up, was pretty robust. This should be one of our higher attended sessions for the year and of the past several years. So we certainly appreciate that, but I think it really just speaks not to the work that Financial Wellness is doing as a committee, although hopefully in part, but really just due to the import of this topic. And I really don't need to tell the people here just how confusing and complex it's become for borrowers in active repayment, for those who are maybe entering repayment for the first time, and those who may be re-entering repayment in a whole new world with a host of different options that I know our speakers will address here momentarily that were not available to us in the past. So we have a phenomenal list of speakers here, and I appreciate Tom Dalton from MedAmerica, and Benjamin Lee from Ascendium, and of course Jillian Glaze from Bunker Hill for joining us. That said, I think there'll probably be questions throughout this session. We're going to give each of our 3 speakers an opportunity to kind of speak to what they see based on their particular, not so much area of expertise, but what they do with their respective companies or school. In Jillian's case, so in the way of introductions, let's give a brief bio here for these 3 wonderful speakers. We're going to start with our leadoff hitter, Tom Dalton, who is currently the Assistant Vice President of Sales and Marketing in the Northeast for MedAmerica. He brings over 40 years of administrative financial aid experience to MedAmerica from both traditional and non-traditional higher education institutions. Tom's impressive resume includes the position of Senior Vice President of Customer Relations at New York State's Higher Education Services Corporation, or HESC, and more recently, Assistant Vice President for Enrollment Management at Excelsior College. He got his start as a financial aid counselor at his alma mater, Siena, and his first director's position at Albany College of Pharmacy. He has served as the president and treasurer of the New York State Financial Aid Administrators Association and the Eastern Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators. And additionally, he has participated in negotiated rulemaking for gainful employment with the U.S. Department of Education. I can tell you, since I started in New York State, both in financial aid and the private sector, Tom Dalton is one of those people you just needed to know because of his expertise and experience. So Tom, it's great to have you. Benjamin Lee is Associate Counsel at Ascendium Education Group, a nonprofit organization making education and training beyond high school a reality for more people. His focus includes compliance, bankruptcy, incident response, and risk management, and he's a frequent trainer and presenter on student loans. He received his law degree from the University of Minnesota, where he studied nonprofit, corporate, and consumer law, and he is very familiar with student loans as he helped pay for his own education with his student loans as well. So this is a topic he knows well and personally. And I'll tell you that the work that Ascendium does as a nonprofit is really second to none. So you talk about an organization that engages in philanthropy and is working with the marginalized, low-income borrowers, and even in our prisons. This is the work that Ascendium does on a daily basis. So Ben, we appreciate it. I'm sure we're going to get a great perspective from you as well.
Thanks, Patrick.
And finally, Jillian Glaze, as I mentioned earlier, really, Jillian doesn't need an introduction here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. She is the Senior Director of Student Financial Services at Bunker Hill Community College, of course, but also a former president of the MASPA organization. She has served in so many different roles within the organization and so many different committees. I know right now she's helping to fire up that government relations committee again and invigorate some advocacy here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And really, from the few years I've been back covering this great state, I can tell you wherever there's good work being done by this association, it seems like Jillian's right in the middle of it, from these committees to the conference and everything in between. So Jillian, thank you as well for joining us.
Thank you, Patrick.
So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom, who I mentioned will be hitting leadoff for us. And just in the way of a quick housekeeping item, I will be monitoring the chat. Please feel free to throw your questions out there. We'll get to as many as we can, both during their individual commentary as well as at the end. So if there are other questions that come up here after Jillian, who will be hitting third for us today, feel free to throw those in the chat. I'll do my best to monitor them. And we are going to close this session with one aha or one takeaway moment from each of our speakers. So stay on for that. I will go on mute, and Tom, I will turn it over to you. Thanks again for joining, sir.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. I want to start off from a perspective of some important dates and what it means. Our parent company at America's parent company is Ed Financial Services, one of the well, now 5 servicers of federal student loans. September 30th or October 1st is a very important date with what's happening with student loans. So one of the things that happened, your FY 2021 cohort became official on September 30th, just a month ago. And notification should have gone to the financial aid office as well as the president of the institution that completely closes that out. In addition to that, the FY 2022 cohort ended monitoring as of September 30th. That will become a draft rate in February of 25, and that will then become official on September 30th, 2025. And then the last big thing, the 2025 cohort opened up on October 1st. So right now, schools have 3, as of today, 3 open cohorts, FY 23, 24, and 25. The other important thing that happened was we have just completed the on-ramping period. So the Department of Education had an on-ramping for the return to repayment. As you know, during COVID, since I think it was 2020, everybody has been in administrative forbearance. People that made payments, those were optional, and they chose to do those voluntarily. So that on-ramping ended. And I will say, I'll throw that out there, that as a servicer and also as at America as a provider, and I'm sure Benjamin will talk about this a little bit too, we're seeing very high delinquency rates for schools, especially the schools we work with. And I think some of that can be attributed to the fact that there's misinformation out there. Students right now they're still looking to see if there's going to be some loan forgiveness. And I know Patrick brought up today's the election, and whoever wins this election today may determine if that happens or not. I think the Republicans are less likely to have more loan forgiveness than the Democrats. So we'll see how that plays out over the next couple of months here. One of the other, so anyways, on-ramping, so everybody in the 23, 24, and 25 cohorts that are open for your institution right now, they're back in full-blown repayment. And however, there won't be any ding to their students' credit history until I think January, because you know that servicers were putting borrowers back into this administrative forbearance if they were delinquent after 90 days. The other important thing that we should talk about here today is borrowers that are in the savings on valuable education or SAVE income-driven repayment plan. There's a court injunction right now. And I can, in a minute, I'll stick out in the chat a link to what's the latest news for that court action. But I don't think that has been really updated since the beginning of October when I looked at it earlier. So I think what the department, if you read that web link, there's going to be information out there that suggests people that are in the SAVE program not make payments right now. They're in administrative forbearance. I have 3 of my children are still repaying their student loans. And so they're kind of in this suspended world, if you will. The other thing I'll mention is, right now your cohort default rates for the last couple of years are going to be on or about zero at most of your institutions. So again, we're seeing delinquency rates in the 23, 24, 25 year that are very high. And I think when those, certainly the 24 and 25 cohorts, when you start seeing those results down the road here, you're going to see delinquency, or you're going to see default rates at or higher than what the FY 2017 was at your institution. So we're in this, I think your institutions should not be lulled into this false sense of security that, oh, our default rate's zero and we don't have an issue. And then I think also we're going to have a better idea come January, February, where it's going to play out in terms of delinquency rates for schools in those cohorts. So that's really my kind of lead in here. And I think I'm passing it off to Benjamin at this point.
Tom, if I could, let me follow up with a couple of questions here. I think one, I'm sure is right in your wheelhouse. The other might be a little bit more subjective, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on that as well. One of the things that's occurred to me as we see the federal government putting borrowers into an administrative forbearance just because your payment plan's gone away. So it just happened automatically. I was in the same plan for my grad school loans as well. Got an email one day, congratulations, you're in forbearance, don't make a payment, we'll talk to you soon, goodbye. Are servicers able to do that? So as we're coming off of this on-ramp, if you find, maybe can you ask the schools, something the school could decide, you see the spike in delinquencies, are servicers able to put borrowers automatically into forbearance to avoid a default? I'm guessing the answer is no, but it's seeming that we're doing this on a regular basis now. Are servicers able to do that?
Well, the administrative forbearance was kind of a special thing with COVID. And I think, the administrative forbearance that students are in for the SAVE program is a little bit different. I mean, servicers have all the tools they had before in terms of, trying to get students current, getting them in the right repayment plan, those types of tools to avoid delinquency, and including forbearance, or encouraging students to go back to school if they haven't completed a degree, and get in-school deferment. So all those things are still available to all servicers. It's, we've been kind of back and forth with this whole thing. It was, I think, 4 times we were going to go back into repayment. And then at the last minute, the Department of Ed came out and said, oh no, hold everything. We're going to extend this. So servicers had to be reactive very, very quickly. And it, let's face it, it's a burden to take, tens of thousands, millions of borrowers and boom, just change them overnight to a different status. And I think pretty much all servicers are experiencing that.
Right. But the forbearance then really has to be initiated by the borrower. You've got all the same tools, but it has to be responsive to a borrower request. So that's fair. So my second question for you, Tom, if you don't mind, in following up on that concept of a borrower request, and it's interesting, as you know, because of my contacts here in the Albany area, I get a lot of calls and emails from financial advisors asking me to help with student loans, college planning. Just had one this morning. Gentleman is in a public service field. He's getting close to public service loan forgiveness. He was on the SAVE plan. Now he's out. What can he do? My understanding, and I think the update we heard at the Pennsylvania conference as well, is that there's nothing you can do. You can't request an alternate income driven repayment plan right now. You can fill out the form, send it in on paper, but they're not acting on it. So I guess a 2-part question. Any updates you can give us on that? Is my understanding of that correct? And secondarily, what if you're coming up on recertification?
So, well, technically with FAFSA simplification, we were supposed to have automatic certification of your income. So I actually don't know the status of that right now. But, I have 2 of my kids right now and a son-in-law that are ineligible. They're within, I think, 10 payments of PSLF. So they would have their loans paid off. And I've just advised them, you're in administrative forbearance right now, just hold on everything. But, unfortunately for them, they would be out from underneath their loans. But I think we are in a hold pattern until the court makes a decision either way. And again, the way the court may determine this may be after the outcome of this election. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Thank you so much, Tom. Excellent, excellent guidance for our schools here. And again, I'll be keeping an eye on the chat there. I don't think we have any questions just yet. So Ben, it is now to you, sir.
Yeah, so I want to start off by talking about, what students and borrowers in particular are facing right now. And I'm one of them, and I won't focus too much on myself, but let me just rattle off some ED initiatives from the last 3.5 years. So pandemic payment pause, public service loan forgiveness waiver, IDR account adjustment, the on-ramp, which Tom mentioned, fresh start, new regulations for public service loan forgiveness and income-driven repayment, automatic closed school discharges for certain schools, borrower defense to repayment, debt relief part one, litigation around SAVE, debt relief part two, and BDR, which is all ongoing right now. That's all going on. All those things are active right now, and they could impact a borrower multiple ways. They could impact some of a borrower's loans, all of a borrower's loans, none of a borrower's loans. It is incredibly confusing out there for borrowers. And there's somewhat of an information void because this department is, as Tom, mentioned, they're having to be very reactive to the litigation, which means their servicers are even more reactive. We officially had policy by tweet for the first time in my memory when they extended the Fresh Start period by a couple days with a tweet. And it wasn't from an official ED account, it was just from the undersecretary's account. So the guidance is fast and furious and incomplete. Servicers have it's an impossible task to keep up with. I can't, servicers, some of them have their own issues. Um, I called my servicer to opt out of debt relief because I didn't want to be taxed on it because I'm pursuing public service loan forgiveness. The woman I talked to was very nice. She had no idea what I was talking about. And eventually I had to tell her, and it wasn't Ed Financial, Tom, I promise. I eventually had to tell the woman, hey, it's the banner on your company's website. It's the second banner. And she's like, oh, they haven't told us how to do that or trained us on that at all. And I'm like, yeah, probably not. It came out a week ago from the department. So there's this huge information void, tons of change, shifting messaging, and the borrower issues are even more layered and complex than they were pre-pandemic. And student loans were always complicated, right? So you can understand why borrowers are frustrated, jaded, angry, checking out, all of those things. And when they're checking out and they have these emotions, they're not necessarily paying attention to their loans and they're not necessarily seeking out good, actionable, unbiased, accurate information, which is hard to come by, to be quite honest. We know that income-driven repayment plans and consolidation, which are things that the department wants borrowers to do in many cases, you couldn't even access them even as a new borrower because of these legal challenges. So more frustration for borrowers, even ones who had never selected an IDR plan. Their first introduction to the student loan system was, you can't sign up for that and you can't do that. So I also want to point out that there's, as always, bad actors with debt relief companies. They capitalize on confusion. And there's also a lot of articles and forums out there where it's more clickbait than good info. And it's all about getting people to read and interact rather than providing good, actionable information. So when a court makes a decision that I, as an attorney and someone in the student loan space, I know that it means nothing in the long term. It's just moving a court case to another jurisdiction. But you see Forbes publish an article saying this paves the way for debt relief. Well, that's a tough message for borrowers to sort of sift through. We don't expect them to be legal experts. So all of this, to say essentially, it's a great time to become a student loan expert yourself, or at least know where to send borrowers and alumni who have questions. I've heard of some companies that provide such services. Won't do too hard of a pitch here, but there's places to go for that good info. Studentaid.gov obviously is where the department updates their websites, which unfortunately is how they get a lot of their messaging out. I'm going to drop into the chat their save update since we were talking about that. And I know it sounds like Patrick, you and I are both impacted by that. I'm in the save forbearance as well. So that's kind of my opening statement there is this is I've never seen the student loan system so close to sort of breaking down and to see borrowers this confused and have so much going on all at once.
Yeah, thank you for that, Ben. Just a quick side note here. If everyone who is not looking to ask a question, just make sure you're on mute, please, so we don't have any background noise over the speakers. We'd appreciate it. Let me follow up on that one right there, Ben, since you talk about how borrowers are feeling disillusioned, confused, frustrated. I mentioned to you when we spoke about a week or so ago as a part of a PSLF research team that's still ongoing. I just have to tap out during conference season. But one of the things we found in our initial round of interviews last fall when we were out in the field was that borrowers were actually starting to report that things like going to college, paying for college, the financial aid system, student loan repayment, that they're all rigged. There were multiple instances where borrowers were saying, they talk about all these great programs that are out there to help you, and that sounds great, but try and access them. So you mentioned borrowers are falling prey to some of these scams. I want to come back to even something Tom referenced in terms of delinquency rates. Is that part of it? Is it just this agitation and aggravation and frustration that the system seems to be rigged against them? They've just put their hands up, said, forget it. I'm not paying anymore. You figure it out. And secondarily, if I could ask this as a two-part question, there have been, of course, in the past, these movements to almost, let's say, unionize student loan borrowers and say, let's, as a group, collectively, just stop repaying. Are we at the point where that actually might start gaining some traction?
Yeah, so a good two-parter, and I could probably spend a lot of time answering it. I'll try to keep it short.
Take your time.
I want to say that, yeah, the messaging from the department a lot of times is about how many loans and borrowers have been forgiven. And their messaging is about them trying their plan B for debt relief. So of course, that message is not conducive to getting a borrower to want to pay back their student loans, right? That is a conflicting message. At the same time, we know that after the new year, the department is going to have to go back into statutory, collections essentially, which means credit reporting. Borrowers will be able to default again after the on-ramp has ended. So people will have to repay their loans. So it's this very mixed messaging, and there's not really a lot of nuance to it. And unfortunately, that lack of nuance filters into everything, Title IV related. So we have borrowers that, or potential borrowers that instead of going to a good school and getting a good education and a manageable loan, they've internalized the messaging that all student loans are bad. Stay away. It's a mess. It's terrible. And there's articles telling you that. And maybe they are passing on some very good opportunities. At the same time, I've talked to financial aid officers that I work with that are saying, well, a lot of borrowers are just maxing out whatever they can take because they think it's going to be forgiven. Well, that's probably not a smart approach either. So a lack of nuance, a lack of good info about what sort of, how it applies to a borrower's individual situation. And yes, a lot of them I think are throwing up their hands. And part of that is the department's messaging, part of it's the media, part of it's other borrowers. And then at the same time, someone like me, I can afford to pay every month. I'm in a forbearance for as long as it takes for this court case to get worked out. That could be years. So I'm not a shining example myself, right? I'm currently not repaying, nor am I supposed to. Seems weird that some people are and some aren't. And as far as the scammers, they've always been there, but all of this confusion is just a gift to them, right? You get a call and it says it's the student loan department, and giving you a credit card number, and I'll make sure that you don't have any payments for the next year. Your payments will be $0 other than this $200 payment. That might be the first time that they've talked to a human being about their student loans in 4 years. So it's a tough time out there for borrowers. That's the short answer. Sorry, kind of rambled there for a second.
No, that's actually a great answer, and I think you're absolutely right. I think we could probably go a lot deeper into this, and I think you position that very well. That based on probably where the borrower already was, either in their approach or attitude towards student loans, or perhaps government or public policy, or all the above, you're absolutely right. We could see those debt averse populations who probably should be borrowing. In fact, there's been some great research on community college borrowers that Jillian may be familiar with, where community colleges have said, look, we're going to do everything we can to keep the debt loads down. And there actually was the reverse effect. It forced people who were also caring for families or had other financial responsibilities to work more, go to school less, and actually graduation rates dropped, as did academic performance. So we don't want students to be debt averse to the detriment of their academic experience. And then on the other side, you have people who kind of capitalized on that perverse incentive and said, this is great. It's a free for all because I'm not paying it back. So very interesting. You position that very well, that we have two very distinct groups. I'm sure many that fall in the middle, but that you're seeing those two. One last question for you, Ben, and by the way, feel free, Tom or Jillian, to jump in on this one too. The one thing that came up in my earlier call with this gentleman, we talk about people in public service not being able to make payments. and I'll be the first to tell you, I try and track this stuff fairly well. I just learned about this PSLF buyback very recently. I saw it on the Department of Ed website, so I know it's not a scam, but I don't think this got a whole lot of play either. So I'll put it out to all three of you, but I'll start with you, Ben, and then Tom, Jillian, feel free to jump in. What are your thoughts on this? What's the nuance? What should we know in dealing with borrowers about this PSLF buyback program?
Yeah, so great question, and I'm going through this myself. October was my 10th year in public service qualifying employment. So I, on October 1st, submitted my form, and then I also submitted my buyback request. Now, buyback is something new as of a year ago. It was part of the new PSLF regulations. Sorry for all the acronyms. I apologize in advance, just how I'm wired, unfortunately. And what it does is essentially periods of time where you didn't make payments or didn't make qualifying payments, mostly deferments and forbearances, you can buy back that time by submitting a buyback request. So for me, I had 10 years of repayment, except for the months that I've been forced into this save forbearance that I'm on. So I'm 3 or 4 months short. So my buyback request is tell me what I would have had to pay during those 3 or 4 months, and I will pay it to get my loans forgiven. And you can go to the department's website, studentaid.gov, look up buyback. The problem is that buyback is a relatively new program and wasn't something that they really had a lot of muscle around. And then the save forbearance happened, and now everyone is talking about buyback because it's one of the only ways to move your PSLF forward if you were in save. So, how long does a buyback request take? I've seen estimates around 6 months. I have nothing but a case number. There's no dashboard for it. It's clearly not a very strong program yet with the department. But for a lot of borrowers, myself included, that's one of the only ways to sort of make this time count right now. So that's what we're going for.
And my daughter and my son-in-law are in that same boat. I think they have a few more. I think they're about 6 months away from loan forgiveness. So, but the one thing I'll mention about is the link I put out there about the court action. If you scroll down about 3/4 of the way on that page, there is information about the buyback, and there's also, as Benjamin mentioned, submit a buyback request. There's actually a link there to follow through on that.
Yeah, and
So
I do want to
I guess
clarify
I'll
really quick. I want to clarify. You only do a
sure.
buyback when you think you have reached 120 qualifying months of employment.
Okay.
So you only do it at the end, essentially, or at least that's what the department is telling us. Just wanted to clarify that. Sorry.
No, that's interesting. Let me ask you both though, because yes, I understand this issue now that borrowers are in. That's particular to the save plan and the current court injunction. But if you had prior months that didn't count, shouldn't that have been picked up through the one-time recount or no? Why was that not happening? Tom, I see you nodding. I'll start with you if you don't mind.
Yeah, so that should have been, we should have caught back up with everybody. And that was several years ago. And so with my own kids, some loans were not getting counted and others were. And obviously it hit the media, and there was some sensationalism around, people that had gone through and thought they were going to have their loans forgiven and things weren't getting counted. So, but yeah, that we should have caught back up for those other payments. And they did. I remember with my own kids, and son-in-law, they caught back up for his payments.
Gotcha. So theoretically, what we hope is you mentioned acronyms and confusion. Both of you address this. Just think of PSLF alone. We have traditional PSLF, temporary expanded PSLF. My understanding is there's still money in that pool, actually, although they thought it would be gone by now. My understanding, although one of you can correct me if I'm wrong. Then we had, when they figured out that wasn't quite doing the job, then we had the waiver. Then we had the recount. Now we have the ability to do spousal consolidation, separation on your FFELP loans, consolidate those over, still get the recount. And then if anything's missed, you can do a PSLF buyback. I'm quite sure the vast majority of student loan borrowers across the country are managing this process seamlessly. And that's just PSLF. So that's all fantastic context from both of you, and I greatly appreciate it. That actually helps me help a financial advisor with one of their clients as well. So thank you for that. So Jillian, with that, I think we'll turn to you and some of what you're seeing on the school side again, so that everyone in the audience is aware. We kind of gave all three of our speakers very broad leeway here to kind of address what they were specifically seeing within their organizations and capitalize on their particular area of expertise. and we wanted to be sure we had a school person here as well. So we've kind of covered this a little bit in the pre-meeting work to make sure that we all kind of had a different angle that we were focusing on here. And so we're very happy to have Jillian talk about what you're seeing at the school level. And I'm wondering too, specifically, Jillian, I'll give you your first question right out the gate to have in the back of your mind.
Sure.
Is everything that we're seeing in student loan repayment actually impacting the conversations you're having with borrowers as they apply, which could be a good thing, but could also be very dangerous in all of this confusion we have going on now. So again, Jillian, thanks for joining us.
Sure. So it absolutely is impacting both how we're approaching talking to students and the questions that we're getting as students are starting as new students with us. We've kind of been on a roller coaster ride, and I know there's lots of folks here from four-year schools, so we're a little bit different. Traditionally, we've had a fairly low borrowing population, but it really was concerning to me to see as the discussion really moved forward about student loan forgiveness, we saw an immediate uptick in our borrowing. And at that time, we were like, oh no, oh no, students are hearing the headline, but not understanding the nuance. And so we had put some parameters in place where we were having students complete a form as they were borrowing to say, I understand that student loan forgiveness is a proposal. This may not come to fruition. And that as of today, anything I borrow, the expectation is that I'm going to have to repay it. Because we were having conversations, on our front lines where students are like, well, I'm just going to borrow this year because it's going to disappear. And unfortunately, I think some students are still under that impression. So we found it even more important to start the counseling around student loans upfront. In the past year, we have started financial wellness counseling for all of our new students at Bunker Hill, and the conversations have been really interesting. I'm really fortunate to have Tisha, I don't know if she's on the call, who's really involved in this on our campus and working with every new student before they register for classes to give them a little bit of financial wellness counseling about borrowing, what it means to be a student, and how their decisions that they make as a student are going to impact them in the future. And so obviously we're waiting for some more hard data to come out. But it's been really eye-opening to see what students are asking about and some of the misinformation that is coming from a lot of social media sources. We have a lot of students who are getting their financial education from TikTok and YouTube and those kinds of sources, and it's not reliable information. So we're seeing a lot of misconceptions walk through the door before the students even sit in the classroom. So we've worked really hard to put together a slate of information that includes a little bit about repayment because it's too early to have a real nuanced conversation. But to answer those questions that might be out there about what does public service loan forgiveness look like, and what do you need to be thinking about if that's your goal, if that's your plan as you are looking at a career. And have those conversations. But it is amazing how little students understand when they're walking in. So we think it's going to be a game changer. We've seen it have an impact on student decision making just anecdotally, and we're seeing it impact our withdrawal rates as well in a good way. Seeing students understand there's repercussions. Repayment's going to come quicker for you if you don't make it through the semester. Those are really important things. And I think, as Tom and Benjamin both mentioned, as much as students are inundated with all of this information about new types of repayment and the nuances of these different programs and different opportunities for students, I think as a financial aid administrator, it's become a challenge to stay on top of it, especially when you throw it on top of the landscape of the past year with the FAFSA simplification, all of the changes there. I know it's been completely overwhelming to try to stay on top of everything and be able to counsel students, because as they come in and they're really thinking about repayment, I think everyone here knows it's a really nuanced conversation, and trying to steer students in the direction of the repayment plan that works best for them. It's not a one size fits all, and it really takes some delving into what the student's individual situation is, because My advice is going to be very different for a student that, is just coming out of college, has a good paying job, and is just starting out in life, versus many of our students who are heads of households and they've got multiple kids they might be thinking about. Those kids are approaching college age. So I know for us it has been, incredibly overwhelming, especially in the landscape of all of the noise surrounding repayment, or really more specifically, not finding ways to not repay, which has really been the focus of a lot of conversations that students are having with us.
Yeah, very interesting and very well said, Jillian. Thank you. I'm going to now call out the rest of you that are here on the call and ask you if you have any questions. Please throw a hand up or just come off mute and put something or throw a question in the chat there, as we've got a few minutes left here. But I think as people are gathering their thoughts and preparing their questions here, as we wrap up the 3 sets of opening comments. I guess a question I'd ask all 3 of you, just from your thoughts, and then please to the rest of the audience jump in. It will really benefit us as well as your colleagues. Is there one specific cohort or demographic that you're seeing at greatest risk? And I say that or ask that because we do have borrowers that maybe have never made a payment before. They may have come out of COVID repayment or that pause during COVID and then gone off to graduate school. And then come out never having made a payment. Maybe they had health issues post-COVID or a job loss, and they were in some type of deferment or forbearance. And then others that are just coming out of school that maybe aren't making the income that they thought they would. Maybe it is, to your point, Jillian, those heads of households struggling through the inflation rates we saw the past year or so. So as people gather their questions here, and I'll just start with you, Jillian, while you're off mute, is there one specific cohort that you are seeing or dealing with that seems to be at greatest risk, at least from your experience on your campus?
Absolutely. I think it's our students who are stop out or in some pattern of taking classes, taking some time off, coming back. And those tend to be our adult learners. Um, with the rise of free community college, we were hopeful that we could get some of those debt rates down for that particular group of students, but we're not seeing that. And I think that speaks to what you had mentioned, Patrick, is those students are trying to enter a new career, and so they're using that funding to help pay for some of those living expenses, which in the city of Boston are substantial, to try to take the burden off so that they can get on to that next step. But the problem is when you've got those heads of household adult learner students who have kids, those kids come first. And so they often are in the situation where they may go full-time one semester to part-time the next semester and then have to take a semester off. And so when they're disrupted in their education that way, making smart decisions about student loan repayment can be really challenging for them. And so I really see them struggling the most. They're also very susceptible to not having time to really dig into information. So it's easy to miss that repayment has started. There's loans that may need to be repaid. And, unfortunately, we know that we've got some default issues looming in the not too distant future for those folks that may not have made this their focus with all of the noise surrounding repayment or the not being in repayment recently.
Yeah, that's a great thought. And Tom, I see you're off mute, and actually I was going to come to you next specifically because I know that you in personally, but also your company has done some great work in the stop out space. So that's just one particular cohort you might want to follow up on. So Tom, your thoughts, sir.
Yeah, so I think there's 2 different things here. There are, in terms of federal cohorts, the 23, 24, and now the 25. I mean, well, 23, 24 for sure. Those borrowers have never known repayment. And so this is going to be all new. And some of these students have graduated and they've moved on and they've made life decisions. They've bought a car or, rented an apartment, and they may be paying more for those things than they would have if they had been, scheduled to start repaying their student loan. So, and then everybody else, that used to be in repayment, they're coming back in. And, so I think, yeah, one of the best ways to get students to pay their student loans is have them to complete a degree. So if they have some credit hours, and I think that's in Massachusetts as well as New York, there's several of these programs to get students, re-engaged and getting back in and finishing that degree. And the best thing is they can be in school deferment if they're at least half time. So I think that's an excellent way of combating. You get your degree and you're more likely to earn a higher salary and be able to pay that student loan. But yeah, there's and I think Benjamin hit on it too. There's a lot of confusion out there, and there's cohorts of borrowers that have never known repayment. So
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that, Tom, because I think I should have been a little more careful in my language there when I mentioned cohorts, really thinking of sort of cohorts demographically speaking.
Right.
Is it at-risk borrowers? Is it older borrowers? Is it new borrowers? Is it borrowers? And so is it unemployed borrowers? Whatever the case may be. But you're right, that could also mean just a cohort, as in a class year of borrowers
Yep.
who haven't known repayment as well, coming out into this mess. Yeah, good luck to them. So no, good thoughts, and thank you for the clarifying comments, Tom. All right, Ben. So we'll wrap up here with you with this question, and this is especially relevant, I think, because Ascendium provides those services to schools and employers to help their student loan borrowers repay their loans. Any group in particular that you find at greatest risk? I'm really struggling with that one here, folks. At greatest risk that schools should be aware of, and maybe just attuned to when they get calls from those borrowers, or as graduating classes move out and into the workforce.
Yeah, so great question. And I'm actually going to zigzag a little, and this might not be the best, plug for the great work that my company does. But the groups that I'm actually most concerned about are probably potential students and potential borrowers, and these kids that are deciding on the front end, or, not always kids, but whether they're going to go to school, and if so, how they're going to finance it. And we've all kind of touched on that group a little bit. I'm particularly concerned in, a good economy with low unemployment, borrowers that could go to school for what could be what we would all consider good debt, right? Student loans that will pay off for them almost immediately in terms of quality of life and career gains. And because they have absorbed this sort of energy from the media or from the people around them that student loans are bad and chaotic, and you can never get rid of them and no one gets any of these benefits, they're just not going to go to school. They're just not going to do it. It's not worth the risk. So I'm concerned about them. And then I'm also concerned about, as Jillian mentioned, borrowers, and I've heard this from multiple places, that are just saying, how many loans can I take out? Sign me up for all of them. They're all going to get forgiven no matter what I do. So great, free money. So I would actually say that those are the groups that I'm probably most concerned about. But to be honest, I'm concerned for all of us. There's you have to dig to find a demographic I'm not concerned about in the student loan space.
Yeah, that's well said, actually, because this confusion affects everyone. I mean, everyone might be in a slightly different position, but as I mentioned, a little bit earlier, this particular borrower who reached out to their financial advisor said, "Look, what do I do if I'm in an administrative forbearance and I want to make payments?" And the reality is, as far as we can tell, they can't. They can't make a payment, and they can't switch their income-driven repayment plan to something else, and they can't keep that clock going. So maybe the answer is, as Ben and Tom discussed, just getting up to that 120 months, get the application in and buy back a few months if that's the case, or maybe work an extra 6 or 9 months in that particular position to reach forgiveness. But these are all fantastic thoughts. I'll tell you this, Jillian, I think we have a potential session there in Massachusetts, or a webinar for a future year, to really look carefully at the borrowing habits and trends and how that changed, especially at the community college level. With the discussion of loan forgiveness, Tom, of course, would always be a fantastic addition to a session like that with his experience. So I've already made a note of that. You'll both be hearing from me there. And I will give one last opportunity here for folks who have any questions or anything else you'd like to share, particular demographic of borrowers you're struggling with. We got about 2 minutes here to open this up to the floor. I don't see any hands going up right now. And I'm going to tell you that I think that's in part because the three of you have done such an amazing job of addressing so many issues. I will tell you this, since it is election day, if we saw more of these types of roundtable Lincoln Douglas debates and discussions analyzing the issues, I don't think people would have as much angst about the future of the country. You are all scholars, gentlemen and gentlewomen. So thank you all for joining. All right, so I told you I'd give you all one last opportunity to share one aha movement. So we'll start in reverse order. Jillian, anything that you think folks should be taking back to their campuses? What's your one takeaway?
I think my one takeaway is things are so chaotic right now that you really do, as a financial aid administrator, need to lean on your partners in the student loan repayment space for the good information. We're all pressed for time, and there are folks out there who have the information ready. And the more you know who they are and the more you can connect your students with them, the better off your students will be.
Thank you. Well said. And I do see your question there. So we will. Oh, and Ben's already jumping on it. So thank you. And all right, Ben, you're up next. So your last takeaway here for our attendees.
I probably said it earlier, but great job by the other panelists hitting some really good points. I think the biggest thing is to make sure that you as a officer, as a student aid expert, know where to go for good information, and also that you know where to send borrowers and potential borrowers for the same. And that's studentaid.gov, their servicer, and then any sort of company or third party that you may work with or that you trust that is giving them actionable, accurate, and up-to-date information. That's worth its weight in gold right now. There's just so much chaos and so many moving parts. It's very difficult, and it's all about where sending people to the right places to get good info. Hopefully, this webinar is one of them. That's the goal.
Yeah, this has been fantastic. And Tom, sorry, you can probably answer this question for us too. So we got one more. Thanks, Casey. For students entering repayment, they can't sign up for SAVE. But if you're not put in the administrative forbearance because you were in SAVE, can you sign up to other income-driven payment plans at all? My understanding was that site was disabled for some period of time. Is it back up? What's our current status, Tom?
Yeah, so yes, but keep in mind that SAVE replaced another income repayment
Repay.
plan. So obviously that's not open any longer. So I believe that the SAVE is back open, but they can't process it right now. But I know it's out on that web, the link, and I think the one that Benjamin provided as well. There's some detailed information about that specifically.
Great,
So
thanks, Tom.
Yeah, and the last thing I guess I would say is, as aid administrators, although right now it appears like your default rate is 0, I think you need to communicate that up to your administration that, hey, this is due to this administrative forbearance that's been in place for the last several years. And, as we look to the future, we're going to have, there are going to be delinquencies now that we're back into repayment, and communicating that now so your administration doesn't get hit upside the head, with, oh my God, all of a sudden we have a default rate of whatever that you're not used to. So I would give you that advice.
Very good. Thank you all. And thank you both, Ben and Tom, for following up on those questions. I actually pulled up the FedAid site, and to your point, it looks like you can start the process for an income-driven repayment plan. SAVE apparently is putting you right into an administrative forbearance.
Right.
Not all of the repayment plans that were available before can be shown, although we may get repay back if SAVE is thrown out entirely by the courts. And it does look like you may be able to recertify now. So it does look like this website is at least up and running to let you initiate the process, but it's going to be at least limited. And again, as we heard last week from the week before from Pennsylvania, any paper applications that go in to move off of SAVE, again, according to one contact of the Department of Education, were not being worked at all in case SAVE came back into play. So they were being held. But you may actually be able to apply for one income-based repayment plan, as Ben has pointed out. So, and of course, that could change by the end of the day, really the way things have been going. So, so keep in touch and stay on top. In fact, I'll share that link as well. But again, I want to thank our panelists. We're at 12:51. It looks like those are the last questions we had. I think, let me pull that up one more time. It looks like we just got a couple of thank yous. One more clarifying question. where any voluntary payments made during the COVID forbearance counted towards PSLF or IDR forgiveness?
And the answer to that is yes, they were. But it, until the court injunction ruled, I believe that was what they said, so.
Got it.
Yeah.
Very good. More to come. And actually, so let me put in 2 quick plugs here, if you don't mind, just to close this out. Again, as the chair or one of the chairs of the Financial Wellness Education Committee, you should know that we do a certificate process every year where if you attend a certain number of sessions, and we're going to be expanding that over the course of the year, you can get a financial wellness education certificate at the end of the year. Show it to your boss, show it to your team. It demonstrates your commitment to professional development, education, and excellence. So please check that out. I've already dropped that link. It's right at the beginning of the chat, so feel free to take a look at that. And since we're talking about student loan repayment, I would be remiss if I didn't plug our good friend Betsy Mayotte, who will be at the Massachusetts conference. So if you haven't signed up for that conference, it's at this great new resort, Margaritaville, which was the old Cape Codder. So it looks fantastic. It's got an indoor water park. It's got all of us, and it's got Betsy Mayotte. So certainly, if you're interested in student loans, that's another fantastic session. She is recognized nationally for her work there. So anything that any other questions you may have, you can bring to the conference. So make sure you register and catch up with us there. And with that said, I'm going to thank you all again for attending. Make sure to go out and vote. Enjoy the rest of this day, this beautiful weather, and we'll see you next time. Thank you to our panelists. Take care, everybody.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you,
Thanks, guys.
Patrick.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben.